Number 7, okay.
Yeah. See that, the young lady is gonna rejoin us. Her name, the student.
Atlantis.
Oh, that's-
Yeah.
I thought she graduated.
No, she was a junior.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready to begin when you are.
Welcome, everyone. I call the Lacey Equity Commission to order. And we have a quorum and we'll begin our meeting. We see present online of Kim, Christine, and Marquita. Thank you all for joining us. And there's our fearless leader, Shannon. Hi, Shannon.
Good evening,
Thanks
everyone.
for being here. And our youth commissioner is joining us again. Elena's, welcome, welcome. We're delighted that you've been reappointed to serve with us another year. Thank you. And we have a guest with us who will be presenting. And our facilitator this evening is Mr. Raphael.
Yes, I am.
Welcome, welcome. With that, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda, the previous meeting minutes, and the consent items. May I have a motion?
I move that we approve the previous agenda, the agenda, previous minutes and the consent items.
Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Elena's. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions. Thank you. Our public comment. Is there anyone in addition to who we've identified that's online this evening who wishes to address the commission? Either by Zoom or by phone.
Chair Jackson, there are no attendees in the meeting currently.
Okay. And by email. And we have a couple items I'll mention later. So with that, hearing no member of the public wishing to address us, we will close the public comment session then. And our inspirational item for the evening is being presented by Vice Chair Cliff Brown.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I have just 3 quotes here that we'll use as our inspirational piece for today, and I'll read them to you. The first is, if you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, help someone else. And that's a Chinese proverb. The second one is, the best years of your life are the ones in which you decide your problems are your own. You do not blame them on your mother, the ecology, or the president. You realize that you control your own destiny. And that is from Albert Ellis. And the final one is, spend 80% of your time focusing on opportunities of tomorrow rather than the problems of yesterday. And that is by Brian Tracy. And those are the inspirational quotes for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Any comments? That 80% is a good one to remember. Yes, yes. Thank you, Cliff. With that, we move into our business items and we have our city attorney, Dave Schneider with us this evening. And Shannon, are you introducing him or Raphael or?
Well, I am very, very excited to introduce Dave Snyder. As Chair Jackson just mentioned, he is our city attorney, and he's here tonight to provide a general overview of what his office does. And with that, I will turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, commission members, for inviting me to share some time with you this evening. As Shannon indicated, my name is Dave Schneider. I'm the city attorney for the city of Lacey. I have been in this role as the city attorney since 2014. Prior to that, I had an affiliation with the city. I was assistant city attorney for about 6 years prior to that. So I've been working with the city in some capacity since 2008. The city attorney's office, the relationship with the city is by contract. So I'm not a city employee, but the firm my firm has a contract with the city of Lacey to provide certain legal services. Now, those legal services are both civil and criminal in nature. So our office handles all of the prosecution that would come out of the city of Lacey that's charged either civilly as an infraction. Now, an infraction is typically going to be what you think of as a speeding ticket or something of the sort. And then all criminal offenses that would rise up to gross misdemeanor in offense level. Anything that's a felony is by state law forwarded to the Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, who prosecutes those matters in Superior Court. Now, our office also handles most of the civil legal matters for the city. Now, that includes preparation for the city council of all of the legislative documents that would be necessary to conduct their business. Now, this could be an ordinance, which an ordinance, for example, was passed by the council to create the Commission on Equity. That was a change in the Lacey Municipal Code, and those sorts of changes are created by ordinance. Also prepare all of the resolutions. Those are council passed documents that are typically more policy oriented in nature, as opposed to something that's being codified. I attend all of the council meetings, whether it's a full council meeting, work session, committee meeting of the various council committees. And then I work with all of the, well, not all, but most city employees, certainly with all of the directors, such as Shannon or city manager Scott Spence, the Public Works Department, Finance, Community and Economic Development, of course, the Police Department and Parks. I have relationships with all of the several of the employees in those departments, and then working through various issues that each of those departments might have. It could be developing policy, it could be working the groundwork of various legislative documents that ultimately will go to council. And then, you know, as issues present themselves, meeting with various employees in sort of a risk assessment sort of role, determining maybe best steps forward. Our office has 3 attorneys in it. There's myself, and then there's Matt Sharp, who is, and then Chad McClellan. Both of those attorneys they do all of the prosecution, and then I do most of the civil, but of course, I can't do all of it. So they assist with a lot of the civil work as necessary. You know, that's just kind of a thumbnail sketch of what I do. I anticipate there might be questions, or if you wanted to certainly ask questions, I would encourage that. And I can certainly expand on. I mean, within each of those departments, there's a lot of work that necessarily gets done, but certainly, I mean, there's 3 attorneys and 2 of them focus almost exclusively on prosecution. So the work with the police department, reviewing their filings, and then representing the city in district court is a lion's share of the work their office does. I should add, if you didn't know, the city does not have its own municipal court. Rather, the city contracts with Thurston County, and the city of Lacey uses the Thurston County District Court and the District Court bench as its own municipal court. So all filings of a criminal nature that are, again, not felonies, but misdemeanor, would be filed in Thurston County District Court. And then our attorneys would go to court there to represent the city in the prosecution of those matters. And much like your commission, a lot of court proceedings subsequent to COVID have gone remote. And that's carried over even now that we've, you know, gone to more in-person meetings. A lot of court hearings, typically of the more mundane nature, are held via Zoom. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or.
Yes.
Absolutely,
Just
please.
a couple.
Yeah.
One, do you have any diversity on your staff? And if not, how do you ensure that your view of potential prosecutions is balanced, and that you're not, you know, leaning toward more prosecutions for minorities?
Short answer, no. our staff is not diversified. Our staff has been, well, Chad is our most recent hire. Matt's been with our office since about 2012. And then Chad was recently hired actually from the Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And so I wouldn't have anything to offer you by way of how, you know, as a non-diversified staff, how we're going to ensure that, you know, prosecution is going to be handled uniformly across, you know, various defendants and through the various ethnicities that may be present in court. And other than to say that we just strive to handle every matter individually, evenly, and, you know, we do a lot of work with Thurston County Prosecutor's Office. We do a lot of work which is more diversified. It's obviously much larger. But we have a lot of consulting that we use with their office. And then certainly throughout the state, we have a lot of consulting that we use, you know, take advantage of through our representation in organizations such as the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And then of course, the Washington Association of Municipal Attorneys, where we can gather a lot of input from other individuals who are removed from our office for input and advice as it may arise.
Question as well. Because as you were saying, you guys lack that diversity and it's hard to understand that diversity as somebody who's not a minority. Is there any diversity training to go along with this lack of diversity? And if so, how would you go about adding it? If you do have it, is it effective and has it impacted any of your workers enough to make these decisions on you know, what's right and wrong, which like in a diverse environment, working for and towards creating a better diverse environment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of the training that we do take, I mean, as attorneys, we all have required training, multiple hours each year that we need to complete and then turn into the Bar Association. And training in these sorts of topics and consistent prosecution and you know, across all, you know, populations is included, and there have been training sessions that, again, with the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys and then with the Association of Municipal Attorneys. So that would be the limits of the training that we have received in these regards, other than training that we would just endeavor on as individuals, but that wouldn't be those courses are the only ones that are required through the office or as part of a job training. Everything else would be by individual choice.
And from your perspective, do you feel like this training is effective? Do you feel like you leave this training feeling like, wow, like I'm going to go into the court with a better perspective? Or do you feel like it's just something that it's put there to make it look as though, you know, the training is there?
I think it's effective. I haven't attended one in a couple of years, specifically with the focus that you're talking about. And I haven't been prosecuting cases in district court personally in probably about 6 or 7 years. So it's, you know, it's been some time, and most of the training that I have had has occurred after I was presently in court consistently on a daily basis, addressing or attending to prosecution matters. But I do believe that the trainings I've participated in have been effective, and I don't believe they're just, you know, check the box necessarily. But I don't have the personal experience of being able to articulate to you how I've been able to apply that in court.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
One, let me follow up to the question Cliff asked. Well, no, in your presentation here, you indicate that your services are provided on a contractual basis with the
Correct.
city as opposed to being a city employee.
That's correct.
Are there any requirements of you as a contractor to adhere to the principles, beliefs, interests, whatever, of the city of Lacey? Is any of that required of you and your firm as a contractor?
Yes, well, we take an oath of office, you know, I did to to uphold the laws of the Constitution and the laws of the state. The policy, the personnel policy for the city wouldn't technically apply because we are not, again, city employees.
Right.
But the ethics that we subscribe to as attorneys of this state certainly do apply. And those together with the oath of office that we take when we're taking on our role, I think you could look at the policy for the City of Lacey employees. And if you compared that with the professional responsibility that we adhere to, I think you'd find that those concerns would be addressed and that we do take that seriously.
My second question, being that you've been with the city in this capacity since 2014, I think you said, and our primary purpose for being as an equity commission is to be concerned about inclusiveness, equity, that kind of things. Do you know, or can you remember any instances where your part of the city has been dealing with issues of maybe complaints of employees or complaints of citizens, dealing with issues of inequity and lack of inclusivity, any of the personnel kinds of issues or hearings or appeals that might have crossed your desk, just from a sense of, how are things in Lacey? We've been trying to get our hands around where are we as a city? How well are we doing along these lines to help inform us as to just how much work do we have ahead of us as we attempt to advise the city? And Cliff's third quote there, 80% should be looking towards the future. So as we're looking at Lacey just projected in such rapid growth, and that rapid growth includes a lot of diverse populations and certain issues that are just naturally going to come up. So my question, thinking about your non-diverse 4-person staff, would the city be requiring you to look ahead? How will you diversify as more and more people come along and the population dictates the need for more legal kinds of things? So I might have mixed in 2 or 3 things there on you, but
Well, the first question you asked, I believe, Ms. Jackson, was whether I see complaints come across my desk, related to inclusivity within the city from maybe an employee perspective or otherwise. And one of the things that I don't do is I don't practice any employment law. The city retains outside counsel up in Seattle for all employment related advice and recommendations. So those sorts of HR related issues that might arise would never be something that I would see. And so, frankly, I haven't been made aware of any issues or any sort of specific instances of that nature. That's a good question you ask me about what am I going to do as far as the future of my firm. Now, certainly, as a contractee with the city, the city council sets policy as to whether or not the legal services are going to be provided by an in-house department, meaning that the city manager would hire a city attorney that would be housed inside City Hall. A lot of cities, I don't know what the numbers were, but certainly a lot of cities have inside city attorney offices, and a lot of cities do what Lacey does, which is contract. And there aren't any specific requirements in my contract that would put any requirements or obligations on seeking to diversify the staff that I have. I haven't had the ability, I bought the law firm that I work in some years ago. It was an existing firm, it wasn't a firm I started. And I've only hired 2 employees, so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity with a small staff. There's just not a lot of turnover. But again, those decisions and the steps going forward, are something that I would have to take personally, as you know, from a business perspective. And but that, as a contracted entity, it wouldn't be, or isn't. It could be, I suppose, but it isn't presently a requirement of the city. And I don't know if that answered all of your questions.
Well, it answered it. I was trying to determine if there was any connectedness to the kinds of policies and public positions the city has taken on this whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And does that include all of the entities that it deals with in some capacity or another, be they employees, be they contractors, whatever. So I was just trying to get a sense of that. And you're saying that a different firm handles personnel matters.
Correct.
And HR matters.
Correct.
You know, so that'll be another question for us to ask. To what degree do your employees of color or disenfranchised employees, to what degree are they looking at or hear about discrimination complaints or mistreatment complaints? That's what I was trying to get at. But once you said someone else does it, then that question
Yes,
just kind of rolled on off the water. Yeah, but that's something we're interested in.
Okay.
You know, we're interested in the policies that it tries to make sure that diverse populations are having access to contractual dollars. So, you know, those kinds of things. And so as the different department heads have come in to present to us, it's helped us to get a picture of how the city of Lacey operates and who's responsible for doing what. So, thank you.
Yeah, very welcome.
Any other questions of Dave?
Well, you took my second question, which having to do
I'm
with the
sorry.
personnel
Yeah,
side of
okay.
things, of course. But I guess a question, when we get public comments, we see them, they oftentimes are objecting to a decision that has been made by the city. Are those the types of things that would come to your desk? For, you know, example, the public comments we got, you know, today, you know, was based on the decision that the city council made, you know, to allow a particular company to sponsor an event. So with that pushback from the community, is that something that comes to you for policy review and you advise the council, those types of things?
Well, a policy decision is always going to ride with either the city manager's office or the council. So I may be consulted with, you know, for input, and but you know, that wouldn't be a recommendation that I would be providing on a policy. So yeah, so I don't, particularly the public comment that you received today, I haven't seen that. And as a matter of course, you know, I don't have any review authority or anything necessarily related to a public comment or a policy question like that. But my involvement would be just more consulting. And I think, you know, what you may not know, or perhaps you do, that would be perhaps the type of concern raised by the public that would be discussed at maybe one of our directors' meetings, or perhaps on a management meeting within that particular department. So certainly I'm consistently pulled into conversations like that, but it kind of can take a different course as to, you know, and maybe if there's certainly a legal aspect to the concern, then certainly I'd be asked for input on that. But if it's a complaint of a general nature that doesn't have necessarily any legal triggers, then I might not be involved in it. But
So
like,
one real quick, sorry to interrupt right there. One real quick point of just clarification. So we did receive 2 written comments, and they will be made part of the full record for this meeting. And that policy in which those comments were referring to, that's something that gets adopted by the city council, and then it gets administered by city staff. So we're talking about the parks corporate sponsorship policy, just to give you some context, Dave. And so we did receive public comment on that, and we are looking to schedule to get that policy back in front of the Commission on Equity as well as the Parks Commission as well, sometime here in the next couple of months.
And I was going to comment on that later on under the commissioner report. So thank you for that. Are there any?
Sorry, one more addition, Chair Jackson. I don't mean to interrupt you again, but just going back to what is Dave's involvement. So, we're going to be reviewing that policy, and we will review a lot of policies, here in the future. And, should there be a change or should a new policy be created, that would certainly be something that, city staff like myself would work with Dave, to proof those policies, bring them in front of this group, and then also create the resolutions or the ordinance, depending on, what was moving forward, that the city council would eventually review and consider.
Thank you.
And can the commission ask Dave for advice too, if we were to come up on some sort of legal issue? I mean, is he one of our resources as well?
So if there was something that we needed to deliberate on as the staff liaison, I would certainly be in communication with Dave on those particular items, or Raphael, or whoever the other staff member is who might be, reviewing a policy or a project in the future.
Great. Do any of our commissioners online have a question of Mr. Schneider?
Hi, this is Kim. I am just wondering if this might be, I just don't know, so I'll ask. How accessible are you to, I mean, sounds like that we don't have, or the public don't have a direct communication with you, your office, that may go through the city staff and so forth. I'm just wondering the accessibility wise, especially the people with the language barrier. You have a layer of service that to ensure that they have adequate access to have that communication. If somebody would have some sort of a legal questions or issues they need to address, is that something that public have direct access to Dave's office, or is that they go through your office, Shannon?
No, there's access to my office from the public, and I do in fact receive messages or phone calls from the public, certainly several times a day. You can imagine that the prosecution arm of our office garners much more attention from the public than does, say, me drafting an ordinance. It's the public is just much more involved with that side. But we field calls consistently with questions about a particular matter. And we answer those questions as completely and thoroughly as we can. Oftentimes we'll get a question that should be going to the city manager's office, or, and we'll just forward that. And then as far as language line, we do have and utilize, communication with persons that where English is a second language. We utilize the language line consistently in court. There's actually cases set on particular interpreter calendars to make sure that individuals that don't speak English fluently can access that service. And then we also, and that's not just for persons charged with crimes, but that's also for victims or family or whomever needs to communicate, be it with the court or with our office or with the defense attorney.
And now, does your office kind of select and decide if that has a case that you will take? I guess based on existing laws and rules?
Correct. So I think, are you talking about maybe an arrest that law enforcement would make, and then they forward a referral to our office, and then whether we would exercise discretion in filing a charge? That most charges in Lacey are going to be what's called a direct cite. That means that law enforcement on scene with probable cause to believe that a crime has occurred, they would make a decision at that time based on their, understanding and knowledge of the law to cite that person. Now, there's certain crimes, DUI and domestic violence related charges can trigger mandatory arrest and mandatory booking into jail. And so my office is certainly not, involved in that decision. We can be. I mean, we'll field calls from law enforcement pretty consistently from the field where they have a question about a particular set of facts or about an interpretation of a particular code provision or state law provision, where we'll offer assistance to law enforcement in real time in the field. But once they pretty consistently, I'd say 95% of filings are going to be by law enforcement. So it's all through a system called Sector, which is an electronic case filing system that's connected between law enforcement, and then the prosecutor can have access to it, and then the courts. So that, and then the person being charged with the crime, the officer would give them a paper copy of the citation with the court date and et cetera. But that's all done electronically. So tomorrow morning, we'll see when the court releases the calendar, we will see at about 10:30 in the morning, we're going to see who's got court tomorrow afternoon. Who, if anybody was booked on a charge. If it's not a mandatory arrest, then what the officer will do in their discretion would be cite and release the person. So they would give them a court date, and those are on Thursdays, say for 10 days in advance for a particular Thursday. And then our office, again, when the court releases the calendar, we'll see who's scheduled for each particular calendar. And we don't have any control over that. That just automatically occurs. Where our discretion comes in, Ms. Sauer, is when we review a police report. Say the officer wasn't sure, that they're not sure whether this meets the statutory elements of the crime or not. They may refer it to us, or they couldn't find the person. They have probable cause to arrest a person, but they couldn't find them. They have other things to do, so they don't cite anybody because they don't know where the person is. So they'll make a referral, and we'll follow up with that. We do an analysis based on statutory interpretation and facts of the case, and then likelihood of our ability to reach a successful conviction. If we look, and this involves looking down the road, you review the facts of the case and you apply the law. And if we're not convinced that a crime occurred, we certainly couldn't prove that in court. So we're not going to file anything that we couldn't prove. Oftentimes we'll refer things, every time we get a referral, it's either filed or it's sent back to the officer with a basis for our action. Perhaps it needs further investigation, or perhaps, it doesn't meet all the elements and we wouldn't be able to prove it. And so then we wouldn't file it. But those are rare circumstances. Most all charges are directly filed by the officers. The resolution, now let me say one more thing. The resolution of the cases is entirely discretionary. With the prosecutor that's prosecuting the matter, working in conjunction with, if there's an offer that's made, obviously the defense attorney is going to work with their client on whether to accept that offer. And there's diversions, there's different types of resolution that are used for various cases, depending on a multitude of different factors.
Thank you.
I have something really quick. This might be inappropriate. If it's so, I'm sorry. Do you have some rules and laws that I could reference for animal cruelty? Something happened in my neighborhood and no one's taking action. I am very concerned about safety because I saw a cat was arrowed down and that that he was walking around, his arrow went through his body, and Lacey police wouldn't take any action. And I don't know. I'm concerned for safety. I don't know what to do about that. I mean, is there something that you have any advice?
Well, I can't give any legal advice. I do sympathize with that. That does not sound like I mean, that's just not the type of situation you want in your neighborhood. Contacting law enforcement is always the first thing. Animal cases are very tough. And Joint Animal Services, which is an entity that's actually Shannon has a lot of experience with. That's an entity created by interlocal agreement amongst Lacey, Olympia, Thurston County, and Tumwater. And so they're located on Martin Way, and they have animal control officers that would respond to allegations of animal cruelty of the sort. And to the matter with which you're speaking, Ms. Sauer, a call to the law enforcement and a call to animal services would be the best steps. And if that's occurred, and you don't see resolution, I can only imagine I mean, again, those are really tough factually to move forward on.
So Commissioner Sauer, we can certainly give you some resources like Dave was just talking about Joint Animal Services. I think to your question though too was, are there codes that exist around animals and animal cruelty? And so yes, you would find those in our municipal code. And I believe, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, it's chapter 7?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's chapter 7. Keeping every one of those code provisions memorized.
But I will send out more
challenging
information
times.
and I'll send out more information and follow up on that. I think
Yes.
Commissioner Sauer, you also had a question going back to your first one about just access in preferred languages. And I know Dave talked a little bit about interpreter services at the courts. Just for kind of some general context, the city has been working on rolling out a language line program where individuals can come into City Hall and various facilities and, point to a sign to indicate their preferred language. And so that's certainly something we're trying to make more widely spread throughout the organization.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Jonathan, I see you joined us online. Welcome. Any other commissioner with a question of Mr. Schneider?
Commissioner Stolberg has a question.
Okay, I didn't see your hand, Christine. Sorry about that. Your question?
Yeah, I was curious. So I know, Dave, you mentioned that there's various resolutions. You mentioned diversion. Is there any racial data on like how many cases get offered diversion versus whatever else they end up, like whatever sentencing they get, by race? Is that data anywhere?
That's not data that we've historically kept in our office. I've communicated with Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. That is data that they are beginning to track. It's in the infancy there, is my understanding. The court does keep track of some of that data, and our law enforcement, the Lacey Police Department, does keep track of some of that data based on arrest. Now, the Lacey Police Department's data would be most relevant for our office because obviously we're not going to be prosecuting anything that's not referred from the Lacey Police Department. But by way of resolution, we don't specifically have data, like how many diversions were offered, and how many people of a certain ethnicity may have been offered diversions or the percentages. That data has not been historically kept.
Okay, but did you say it's beginning to be kept by Thurston County?
I think, well, it's my understanding. I think Thurston County is looking into ways in which to capture that data. And I don't have good information for you on how far along they are in that process.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Dave,
Any
you
other
mentioned-
questions? Shannon?
Dave, you mentioned some diversion programs. Could you tell us a little bit more? I know there was a question at our last Commission on Equity meeting
Yes.
centered on diversion programs. Can you provide some more information on that?
Yes, so diversion itself is a term often associated with several different outcomes. I mean, you think of it like diversion, the finding is diverted for a later date. Typically, that means that the person charged has some conditions to achieve, and if they achieve these certain conditions, then something happens to the charge other than just convicted as charged. So an example would be, say a theft. If there's the two factors that you typically, the facts are always important, right? So if it's a low level offense, if the victim is not, I don't want to say not concerned because they're always concerned, but there's just different levels. If a person has never been caught stealing before, and this is their first ever charge, and it's not a violent offense, it's not, there's no associated criminal like assault or anything associated with it. It's just a theft of, say, a book or something. Then that would be a prime candidate for what would be in our legal term a stipulated order of continuance, where it's a long way of saying diversion, but that's the technical term, where the person charged would stipulate to the accuracy of the investigation, basically saying, yes, what the officer said happened, it happened. But then in exchange for that stipulation, then the prosecutor agrees to continue the matter for, say, 12 months. And then the condition on a theft might be, well, have no contact with the store that you stole from and have no criminal law violations. There's always a $43 court mandated, statutorily mandated fee. It's $300 or $43. Court fees for, as you can imagine, crimes like theft are oftentimes reduced as much as possible. But there's certain conditions that they have to meet, and that's always going to be up to the judge. We can just make a recommendation, but the judge orders it. In a situation like that, if 12 months go by, the case would just be dismissed. If 12 months go by and say there's another charge, say there's a new law violation, they committed another theft. Well, now they've stipulated to the accuracy of the police report and the sufficiency of it to support the charge. So now they've basically waived their right to go to a trial. There's some formal process by which a judge would find whether or not they violated the terms of the continuance, but they typically at that point would be, they'd have their diversion revoked and it would be entered as a conviction. And those sorts of agreements, I just used theft as an example. Those sorts of agreements are applicable across the board. And it's, again, there's a lot of factors that go in, but it's usually you're looking at community safety would be number one. Accountability and deterrence are big factors. And if it's an appropriate resolution, the defense attorneys are always involved with this. The victim, if it's a victim case, is always going to be involved in this. And then if a decision that makes it appropriate for that sort of diversion is appropriate, then that's the recommendation we'll make. There's other therapeutic courts at district court that Lacey is privy to. And in fact, Lacey had the very first case in Thurston County for mental health court. It was a Lacey case that opened that court, that started it. And mental health court requires a nexus between some sort of mental health diagnosis and the criminal conduct that occurred. And if there is a nexus there, then with the prosecutor's recommendation and with the defendants, with his defense attorney, with their acquiescence, and of course the court has to approve it, it can be a candidate for mental health court where it's a diversion. The person in that case would plead guilty, but not be sentenced. The sentence would be set over for a period of time, 2 years. And then the defendant would make, beginning usually with bi-weekly court appearances where they're meeting with the judge, meeting with the prosecutor, meeting with the defense attorney in a therapeutic court setting where there's just a very low-key, relaxed conversation between the defendant and the judge, talking about the improvements that they've made and how they're, they have to be in some sort of, getting, counseling or something for the mental health diagnosis. And then after 2 years, if they're successful, then that case is going to be dismissed. And the goal there is to treat the underlying mental health issue that would hopefully curb the associated criminal behavior. There's similar, for alcohol and drugs, of course. Thurston County has a drug court. And then most recently established has been a veterans court, which works very closely with the mental health court, applicable, of course, for veterans. So those are the examples of the deferrals and diversions, if you will, that are available for Lacey charged cases, which are the same as would be available for a Thurston County charged case. Olympia has their own court. They have very similar programs, but slightly different.
Great. Any other questions from our virtual attendees?
Well, yeah, I do. It's about bail and setting bail, and I don't know the courts very well, but there's a lot of talk about how bail is a huge burden to people and their families who cannot make the bail and have to sit in jail while it's happening, and then they can't pay their child support and they lose their job. And that has there been that kind of discussion review in Lacey?
Yes, we talk a lot about, and when I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of consultations, or we'll, get other attorneys involved. I mean, a lot of times it's about these sorts of questions. And setting bail is very tricky. You have community safety on the one hand. That's the paramount reason for bail, is to ensure that a person that's alleged to have harmed others is not going to have that opportunity. So a person with, take DUI, for example, if there's a history of driving under the influence offenses, convictions, and you'd be surprised how many priors a person can have. It's, I would say impossible, nothing's impossible, but it's darn near impossible to not seek high bail on a case like that, because the community risk is so great. Another risk factor, of course, can be a history of failing to appear for court. And so, if there's just a history of several warrants and this person doesn't ever appear when he's told to show up, that's a reason maybe to ask for bail to ensure their appearance, because if they post the bail, then there's something more at stake. It's tough, and ultimately that's a judicial decision. The attorneys that are involved in the case, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, are both going to tell the court what they feel is the appropriate release conditions. And without question, it's always, there's always a request that the defendant not commit any law violations, not drive without a license and insurance, kind of the basics, right? If there's a victim, no contact with the victim until we resolve this in court and determine whether, so these sorts of release conditions are pretty uniform. But when community safety is a factor, and when a likelihood to return to court is a factor, that's when imposing monetary bail becomes something that the prosecutor would ask for.
Any other questions?
Comment.
Yes.
Just to wrap everything up and respond to this awesome conversation that we just had. I heard a lot of your responses were that is an issue, but I don't really have a lot of control over it, which is totally understandable. But just from your high point in our, legal system, just know that although you're not the one to make the ending decision, that you do have an impact, because you are involved in these conversations. And it's very important, just as well as these people who make the ending decision, for you to be just as aware and aware and understanding of these issues, because you have the impact and the authority that you do, although you aren't the one at the ending of the conversation. You are somehow in it in a very powerful way, and it's important that you are just aware of these issues just as well as them.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
I am, yes, that's very important.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Thank you, Dave, for joining us this evening.
Anytime, thanks, and if you have questions, I'm available to, to ask. I guess I'll leave it to Shannon as to any future conversations.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thanks.
That
I'm
moves us
sure.
to-
Oh,
Go ahead, Shannon.
I was just going to say thank you, Dave, and I'm sure you'll be back here before the Commission on Equity in future meetings. So again, this is an introduction, just like we're doing with the rest of our department heads. So I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to being a part of solutions that you guys come up with.
Great,
All right.
thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
That takes us to item 4B, our strategic diversity ongoing discussion item. And Shannon, you are taking us through that, I see.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, Chair and Vice Chair and Commissioners. It's nice to see all of you. Raphael, if you wouldn't mind sharing the PowerPoint presentation, we will jump into it. So just as kind of a background, Raphael is queuing up the PowerPoint presentation. So we're in the middle of our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. And I know this has been spanning several months now, and we've got our kind of draft mission, vision, values, as well as goal areas, and have been working through our strategies within each of the goal areas. We're now going to also start taking a look at, some of the other items that could be included as part of the draft moving forward, as well as some of the indicators. So Raphael, I'm not seeing the PowerPoint quite yet.
Yeah, so we have kind of a technical issue going on our end right now. The Zoom webinar, even though we can see you and we can hear you and we can see you moving as well, it's actually not responding. I've got the nice little circle of death going on my end right now. And that's not allowing me to actually access the panel to share the item.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can share on my end, if maybe it ends the circle that you have going on.
Okay.
You still having that issue, Raphael?
Let's see. Oh, it just went away. Okay, so I'm gonna attempt to share right now. So give me just a moment.
It wouldn't be a commission meeting without one slight technical issue. So I'm glad we're able to navigate through that. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Raphael.
Okay, all right.
Perfect. So if you want to advance the slide, we've got our agenda, so you can go right through that one as well. Perfect. So, we started going through kind of where we're at in this process, and I want to continue to show the Commission on Equity, the progress we're making as we move through this. So at our last Commission on Equity meeting, we really focused on item number 3, which was introducing the 2 remaining draft focus areas and their strategies. And as you can see with item number 4, we're really now moving on to draft indicators and benchmarks. But in addition to that, we also want to take a holistic look at, hey, what else should be in our diversity, equity, inclusion plan? Because as you can see with items 5 and item 6, we're going to want to integrate and review those items moving forward. So the first thing I just wanted to do with tonight's workshop is just take a look at some of the draft things to potentially be included, and then get some feedback on that. And then we'll transition over to looking at draft indicators and benchmarks, and we'll continue the draft indicators and benchmark conversations here at our next Commission on Equity meeting. One thing I do just want to point out again is that we are going to have some opportunities for internal staff review during step 7, which is where the executive team and other key city staff members are going to have the opportunity, once we have a draft, to take a look at it and provide some meaningful feedback and any questions or concerns or things that we should look into in more detail. We'll take a look at that feedback in step 8 as the Commission on Equity. And then moving forward from that, we want to go out and get more feedback from our community. So, we anticipate, holding a couple of community sessions, making the materials available online, so that people can access them and provide information and feedback, wherever they are. So the reason I just wanted to stress this is we are going to have, again, a couple more opportunities for city staff as well as members of the public to become involved in this process, and to take that input and feedback and incorporate it into our draft strategic plan moving forward. Perfect. So if you open up your packets for tonight, you'll notice that I had put in there some draft materials that could be included in the plan. And so I'll just go over them really quickly. Obviously, we're going to want a cover page and design, some acknowledgements and messages from the city council, city manager, and also the Commission on Equity, as well as an overview of, who, what, and when and why and how the Commission on Equity started, and, kind of the work that you all have been doing and are going to continue to do here in the future. Again, more just logistical, table of contents for the rest of the document. And then moving more into the context and some of the pieces that we certainly want to get some more feedback from you all on is just an introduction on, what the document is and how it's supposed to be used, what the process was for creating this document, a very high level overview of some of the existing DEI efforts that are ongoing at the City of Lacey currently, and then just kind of broadly, what the future with the application of this document looks like. And that really ties into number 9, which is the mission, vision, and values. So again, starting with the vision, what do we want the City of Lacey to look like? How do we get there with the mission? And what are our values along the way as we work towards that vision? We've been working a lot on our goals and strategies, so providing a very high level overview of what those are, so individuals who might be picking up this document can get a very clear sense very early on of, hey, this is our, again, vision, these are our missions, these are our values, but here's the goals that we're going to be working in, and here are the strategies that we are going to be trying to accomplish all of the above. Number 11 is providing more context for the community. So think of it as kind of a snapshot of where Lacey is now, a very broad overview of the community. So providing demographic data, income data, poverty data, home ownership data, education rates, and then also, again, just a maybe more in-depth review of, again, what the city has been doing in various departments. Although, as you can see, not maybe everything. I know we have had every city department almost to this point come and provide a presentation to the Commission on Equity, and we certainly want to make sure that we incorporate that in a meaningful way in an appendix where there's a full explanation of all of the activities that are ongoing currently.
Shannon, can I interrupt you there on number 11, the data?
Absolutely.
Yes, in progress, and we'll be giving input on some other areas, but things that have come up in the commission off and on since our beginning would be data on employment, data on business ownership, those kinds of things disaggregated by race and ethnicity. We were just asking questions about, diversion and some of the criminal justice kind of thing. All of that contributes to the overall picture that's painted for the City of Lacey. So I'm assuming that A through F isn't all inclusive, that other areas of data, big picture data can be included there that would, further illuminate, a profile or a view of Lacey. Not only now, but what appears to be, coming down the pike kind of thing. Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair Jackson. And that's one of the things we want to get some feedback. I know the Commission on Equity has, to your point, provided feedback on several of the data sets that they would like to see. And so certainly we want to take that into account. And then anything else that the Commission on Equity may think that we're missing that we should look to add to this snapshot. One thing that I will say is, we're trying to provide a general overview with a snapshot. And as we get to the next section when we actually go into the in-depth look at the goals and the strategies, because in number 10, it's just a general overview, but that we provide meaningful data that is specific to those goals and strategies. So to your point, and I'll use business ownership, I think you had brought up, providing that when we're looking at livability, which has our goal that is connected to, economic development.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair Jackson, this is just a brief introduction. We're going to jump into our Jam boards here in just a second. So I would welcome all of the additional data sets, that the Commission on Equity can think of now. And then in the future too, if there are things that should be considered, certainly sending me any additional requests or information as we move forward with this process.
Okay.
Right. So again, just trying to provide the context for readers as they're going through this document. So really the idea with the key terms is to set them up with a shared understanding of the terms that are being used throughout the document. And so if you recall earlier on in this process, the group elected to move forward with using the state's Office of Financial Management DEI glossary. I included that also in the materials that I sent out to the Commission on Equity because there was an update, and the idea is that they would update it on a semi-frequent, if not annual basis moving forward. So the key terms here in the strategic plan would again just to be providing that shared platform and that shared language to move forward with the rest of the plan. So what I've provided here are just a couple of possible key terms, but in just a second, we'll certainly want to see if there's any other items that the Commission on Equity would like to make sure is brought to the forefront of the plan. But as you can see with 12M, the idea would be that we would incorporate the full appendix as well, so that anybody who has any questions about any language that they might find in the plan or outside of the plan to have conversations or dialogue would be able to access that information through our strategic plan. Moving to 13, this would be, if you can go back just one slide for a second. We want to just kind of really expressly explain kind of the criteria of how things got into the strategic plan, and really emphasizing, what the city's roles are. So really showing that in, some of the strategies that are outlined, the city can be a lead, the primary sponsor, the person who carries the torch. In other items, it really is going to be a partnership where we're working with, organizations outside of the city. And then in the third one being advocates, where, using our voice and bandwidth to be able to get information or, to have certain opinions expressed. So really just outlining again that there could be multiple roles that the city plays, and that the city might play multiple roles at once. So, the city could lead in one way, but also be a partner and advocate in many others. And then also talking about how accountability, which is emphasized throughout our values and our mission and our vision, is a big part of the plan, and just an overview of what benchmarks and indicators are before we actually jump into the subsections that follow. Which leads me to those sections, and that is the goals, strategies, and the accountability in more depth. So the idea would be, again, that the readers would have a very high level overview of what that looked like. And then we would have a much more intense and robust context of what those particular goal areas were. So you can see under each goal area, we would have the strategies listed, the benchmarks and the indicators, the key terms specific to those strategies. So this could be re-emphasizing key terms that were already brought up in the earlier section of the plan, or it could be new ones that are introduced that make a lot of sense for being within that area. Data that is specific to that particular goal area. So if there are data sets that maybe aren't included in the beginning, or data sets that we want to re-emphasize as we're looking at those specific goals that were included, we could incorporate it so that way readers would be able to get a good snapshot of, where we are currently and what we're, looking to do as far as those goals, strategies, and then the accountability. And then finally, just a very high level overview of, the existing efforts that are currently going on in the city. So again, we would have that in earlier in the section, but then you could really directly see, for example, what kind of human resources work was going on in the workforce and work environment goal area. And then you could also find a much more in-depth information of that towards the back end in the appendix. And so those 5 things would be communicated with each of our 4 goal areas.
So basically, those data and the existing efforts would have to be renewed every year for this document.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner. And I think the idea would be that the document might be somewhat static, but that we would have information that does update. So maybe not necessarily every single year would the whole plan need to be updated, but we could have, our reports that go out to the Commission on Equity and the City Council that shows updated information, as well as accessible information, through our website on Changing Data as well. And then to that point, Commissioner Clay is having, what does that report look like, report out, and how does that happen? So the idea being that, we are continuing to get new information on any, programs, policies, or progress that we're making in any of our indicators. So reporting out on an annual basis and what that would look like regularly. So there is that accountability incorporated into the draft DEI strategic plan. And then finally, the appendices, just like I had mentioned, would incorporate some of the elements that we already discussed, the full OFM glossary, the ordinance that created the Commission on Equity, our engagement findings, which we have talked about, previously, and then incorporating any additional engagement findings that come out of any subsequent reviews of the draft strategic plan, and then a much more in-depth dive into the existing DEI efforts here at the city. So with that, Raphael, if you don't mind, let's just take a break with the PowerPoint presentation. And I'd love to just kind of open up the floor a little bit for the Commission on Equity. We also have a Jamboard exercise here, but just kind of maybe just generally speaking, I just would like to hear any thoughts on those elements moving forward in the draft strategic plan.
Shannon, I have a question before we move to the next segment of what you want to do. With the presentation that Dave Snyder just made to us about the legal kind of thing, he made reference to some other contracted entity that does the role of personnel administration, HR kinds of things. How many other contracted service providers are out there working in conjunction with the city of Lacey in some aspect, off the top of your head? I mean, because as we talk about all of these things and these 5 sections under each of the 4 goals, yet, here's this other entity of folk that's contracted with, that's not personnel of the city. How does all that interconnect, where they are contracting with the city of Lacey and this become the city's strategic plan?
So Chair Jackson, I think your first question, if I heard you right, was just on the number and what does that look like? And what I will tell you is I don't know a definitive number for you. We can certainly try to get better information on that for you. But what I will say is they look very different contract to contract. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So Dave, like he mentioned, is a contractor and he has 2 individuals who work for him, and they are full-time contractors for the city. So they work on behalf of the city, for the majority of their time, if not all of their time. We have other contractors who do the same thing. And I know Raphael right now is working very diligently on our public defense contractors. And we do have a full-time public defender and then a range of public defenders that are less than full-time. We also have a lot of contractors, as you've learned from like Public Works and Community and Economic Development that work on various degrees. So for example, you might have a company that is contracted for a specific road project or even a specific part of a specific road project. So contractors can look very, very different across the city depending on the job that they're doing for the city.
So at any point, are those contractors shared with or expected to adhere to the city's value statements? You know, this kind of thing that we're listing in our strategic plan, are they not expected or held accountable to adhere to some of the values of the city in carrying out their particular contractual obligations to the city? I'm just curious about that. We might have to think about that for a minute, but
Yeah, and Chair Jackson, what I would say at a very high level is every contract looks incredibly different. But what I'm hearing is the question of, is there something that maybe we can take a look at across all contracts that is
Yes.
reflective of the city's values? And I certainly think that is something, as we start to look for draft indicators and measurements that we will certainly want to keep in the brain bank for further conversation.
Particularly our service contracts that are dealing with our population.
immune, that was the word, wouldn't come to my mind just a few minutes ago. Are they immune from the kinds of values and expectations and accountability measures that you would be holding employees to when they're providing such a gargantuan amount of services that involves probably a huge portion of your budget as a city?
So, so Chair Jackson, what I would say is, they are bound to the contract with the city. Now, I think the question is, could there be elements incorporated to a contract moving forward? That's certainly something that we can take another look at and get more information and have more conversations in front of the Commission on Equity about. I think the other part of that question was just kind of the city's values and policies. Well, as Mr. Snyder had discussed earlier in the conversation, as a contractor, the city's like personnel policies do not impact, his organization. It is the contract he holds with the city that he's held to.
Right. Yeah, that might be something the city wants to look at, and something I know I would be interested in looking at. What can be added to the contractual obligations of your vendors that put them in alignment with what the city is trying to do? Because, looking further down the road, that could make quite a difference in the outcomes and the accountability measures we're trying to look at. Thank you. So it's one of those thought questions that, we need to think about. But if we've got all these people out there providing these different range of services on behalf of the city and to the city, somewhere they need to be in alignment with what the city is trying to do, because they could counteract all your hard work as a city. We're a contractor. We're not an employee of the city. We don't have to follow that. We don't have to be held accountable for that. So I just toss it out there, Shannon, for some thought, because, all of this stuff has to be fused together, integrated together. I changed my word, fuse, integrated together. If we're to get what we're trying to get as a community.
Yeah.
And that just dawned on me. That question just popped in my head just then, but popped in my head when Dave was talking about, he was a contractor, somebody else was a contractor, and I'm saying to myself, well, who else does the city contract with? So let's revisit that at some point in the future as we're finalizing this strategic plan. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? First of all, am I just? Okay, thank you. All right.
All right. Well, then I would like to just get a little bit more specific. I know I was very kind of broad, but just to get some more feedback from the Commission on Equity. Raphael, if you don't mind sharing the Jamboard. And we'll start with just taking a look at some of the draft strategic plan elements, and we can go pretty quickly through this. Unless there's, I mean, if there's a lot of conversation, we can take some time and go slowly through it. But if you just need to think about it and we need to come back to it, we can certainly do that as well. So Raphael, if you want to get us through the first page. So I guess just looking at the first 11 elements, and I know we had a conversation about data and I heard a few more things in there. Are there other things that the Commission on Equity, just looking at the first 11, would like to incorporate or change or have a conversation about?
The thing that crosses my mind as I was reading through this in the background material, what brings about the need for an equity commission? There were lots of things going on in the country, the climate, the environment was changing, the challenge to our democracy, our cities, our counties. So what was the climate on which DEI efforts all over this country, at every aspect of it, all of a sudden just popped up? You know, George Foster's death and a whole bunch of things. It is a contextual kind of preface, kind of introductory statement at the beginning of the strategic plan, and just kind of setting the stage of why it's important that an equity commission exists, why it's important that these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion be taken as a serious matter for municipalities all over just some contextual kinds of sentences or intro paragraph of whatever, and could bring in the fact that the city of Lacey is continuing to diversify, and by 2040, 2050, we anticipate that our population will represent that, just some contextual kind of framework as people move through the remainder of that plan. It didn't just drop down, out of the stratosphere. There's a reason why cities like Lacey saw the need for equity commissions and DEI activities all over the place. And I was going to speak to that a little bit under my comments. But that's the only thing I see. It could be in acknowledgements, I don't know, but just that kind of thing.
I would say that will probably fit under number 5 in the overall message that the commission may be trying to send. When you see where it says Commission on Equity message, I believe that could be framed as part of the overall message that possibly the commission could be trying to send at that point.
I think it'd be important that comes in the city council message, because they're the ones that brought it about, the city manager message and our message, that it becomes personal to our community, and that the need arose, they recognized the need. And I think those 3 messages could be really strong and include that.
And I think too, it's important to highlight that we're on the front end of this. We've taken it on early.
Yes.
And so we're leading, in the South Sound with this, because when I talk to people about the Commission on Equity, they go, really? You guys said? So, we're one that's out front and early in developing this, and others will look to us.
And that it was created as a commission, not a task force, that we are dedicated to making the foundation strong, so that whoever sat in the council seats, this was gonna go on.
I just think the reading of the remainder of the plan would be enhanced if those kinds of strong statements from all these entities are made up front. Because everybody, I want to use this, everybody and their uncle has a DEI and an equity commission these days. But what's different about this one? How dedicated and committed are we to making it more than just another commission, just another set of actions to be able to check off a box as a city that we have, oh yeah, we have one. Well, we are different than the others. Cliff is right. I was gonna make a comment about that later. We are out front. And so I think the council, the mayor and the folk that saw the fit and the need to bring this about, citizens of Lacey need to know that. It's something to be proud about. So in that outline, it's just that kind of thing. It might be inferred, but I would just like to see it be more deliberate and intentional. And like Annie said, the city council's message, the city manager's message, the commission's message. And then by the time folk get to the rest of it, this one seemed to be a little different than others I've looked at, you know. The strategic plan is just a strategic plan that people are accustomed to just putting it on the shelf and it becoming a dust collector. We don't want this one to be that. And so that's just my observation, in addition to what's already there, for some intentional kind of language to be included in those messages, uniform, intentional language that I think would add a lot of strength to it. If not already anticipated. I don't want to assume that that wasn't already anticipated, but that's my input.
This is Kim. Yeah, the message intention, all great. I wonder if we can also add, like, you know, the actionable item that are something that's happening. What's happening that is that we can regularly show off our output, like, I don't know, we the number of events that we attend, number of interactions we make with community members, you know, things that we did. We were part of Juneteenth events. So the actionable items, that action speaks, you know, not just the intent. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kim, I think that's item 5 under those 4 goals, where existing efforts specific to action in each of those sections, that report will have an opportunity to point out the kinds of things you're talking about. Is in under item 14 with the 4 goals and the 5 work areas.
And those are the things that will be updated, you know, say annually, you know, to stay current. It's a good point.
But otherwise, Shannon, I think if we can develop a document that follows this outline from the cover page on through, it would be an awesome document that others would be very interested in duplicating and learning from.
Well, Chair Jackson, it sounds like there is consensus on the Commission on Equity message. Is that correct?
The Commission on Equity?
Would be writing a message at the beginning of the plan, correct?
Oh yeah, along with the city manager and the city council. Yeah. But we don't want it to just be our message. We want it to be consistent with their message and vice versa.
And so I guess thinking to the future and wanting to get all of these elements, you know, put together, certainly, you know, the city is going to be working on putting together a lot of the pieces that the Commission on Equity will review. But I also think it would be, you know, perhaps good to have a subcommittee start meeting to talk about the Commission on Equity message for future review by the full commission.
Not a problem. I know our column of status says not started, but what kind of timelines might we be looking at there?
Got a couple months, Chair Jackson, but I do think it would be good to start getting together to, you know,
Sure.
to start formulating that and having conversations and then bringing it back maybe to the full body for review.
Right. Very good.
I have something to add really quick.
Sure.
Letter E in regards to education rates. I was previously in a meeting last year in the River Ridge Theater, where they basically were bringing together a lot of people in the community who supported the BSU in preparation for the protest, basically explaining why they were doing what they were doing and inviting people to join, kind of just giving an overview of the whole process and like the movement that they were beginning. And one thing that they had mentioned and provided us was data and a PowerPoint of the education system, Northurston Public Schools. And basically what they have been doing is moving issues involving racism and just like overall non-diversity and sexual harassment and things like that into more broader categories like bullying or disrespect. That way, the education rates will not appear as accurate as they actually are. And instead, it now appears that 300 kids were suspended this year for disrespect, when in reality, 150 of it was racism and 150 of it was, talking in class. And you know what I'm saying? So it's important that when we dive into these educational rates, that they are real surveys from students rather than just, percentages that we see online from the school system, because oftentimes they aren't accurate. And it would be even better that as we dive into getting these rates, that we confront the school system about, okay, we want some accuracy here in regards to our strategic plan for the city.
Okay, and that's perfect. That's my third item under my commissioner reports. Like minds thinking here tonight, very good. But when we talk about education rates under this whole thing of data, we're talking about to what extent is our K-12 school system been effective for all students? What's the dropout rate? What's the graduation rate? Do we have any disproportionality in discipline? Or are our schools serving as a feeder system for the juvenile justice system and subsequently the adult penal system? Those kinds of things. Do we have a problem there that because we aren't paying as much attention to the school system and its data, we have a city problem on our hand? I don't know. I'm just making that statement. And so when we see education rates, I think we need to be very clear what kind of rates we're talking about. And Atlanta's raises a good issue. I'll just say what I was going to say under my resulting comments. The school year ended for North Thurston Public Schools with our high schools being in disarray from the point of view of protests and walkouts and some very definitive list of demands the students made. Then the summer came. Now we're in another school year. I'd be interested in knowing from the school system, were those concerns adequately addressed? How have they been resolved? Because I had made a statement earlier in another one of our meetings that we can't have an equitable community if we don't have equitable schools. And so while two separate entities, what's happening in the schools have to concern us, because as goes the schools, so goes the community. So somewhere to loop back in a conversation, if no more, with school district people so that we have a sense of what's the status of things. So education rates, could mean anything, but where are we educationally, and the quality of our schools that attract people to this community, as school system has already become majority minority, already is majority minority. So Elena's raises a good point, and just a matter of seeing what those rates are we're talking about for that that item E
More specific.
to be as definitive as it needs to be. So thank you for that.
And to answer your question in regards to, like the summers here and what has the school district necessarily done to show effort and overall, making these rates change, it hasn't been very much. Actually, there is, I'm sure or if you've been in communication with Krishita or Miss Jones about the cultural center, and they've been having events every Saturday for students to come and do open mic and just have very effective activist type conversations and have great food and just, overall set the tone of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion for students. And we've been reaching out to the schools all throughout the summer to kind of get them to sponsor or even just say a morning announcement about these programs that we, have going on at the cultural center. And they've shown no sort of interest in collaborating with any of our, cultural centers or hopefully commissions, because we plan to also reach out to the school systems and, see how we can support. So just to add on to that, I haven't seen any overall effort or changes in regards to the school system. And I would love for us to dive a little bit deeper into getting some accurate rates, getting them to work more with the cultural center and getting them to work more with our equity commission.
This is gonna be a juicy report.
Well, and I
Be
think
in high demand, we need to sell it.
Right.
Revenue producing.
so. So one thing on that note, Chair Jackson, to keep in mind too is, I guess I would say, obviously, what you brought up is, hey, we've got to get some more data and understand kind of what we're looking for and how that gets incorporated too. And I think it's all very, very important. I think too, just the balance of making sure that we have a document too that is accessible. So something I think we have to figure out what data sets we're going to be looking at, and we'll certainly have more conversations coming soon on that. But just also keeping that in mind.
Yes.
And seeing in the plan, under the 4 items, where educational data would fit in livability or in community access and engagement, we added again in its special spot.
Great.
All right, well, if we can move on, Raphael, to the next page. So this is looking at just the key terms and again, pulled from the OFM glossary and specifically the updated OFM glossary. And then also talking about the criteria, which, what is the city's role? Lead, partner, advocate. And, Commissioner Sauer, I heard you bring up, hey, what are we doing? So what are those high level kind of benchmarks and indicators that are showing the work in progress that is being made implementing this strategic plan year over year and maybe quarter over quarter? So I'll just take a pause here and see if there's any additional key terms or other items that the commission thinks should be incorporated here.
The only term I see missing in those main ones under number 12 that comes up quite a bit is implicit bias. A lot of people do not understand that term, but implicit bias is very much at work here. So to define that up front, so it doesn't get lost in that whole menu of terms.
And I know this one probably ties into very many of them that we already have listed, but restorative justice, something very important that we should include. Either we make it as its own thing or tie it into another one that we already have. Just in expressing the importance of restoring the systemic inequities that we have already placed within our society, as well as creating opportunities for diversity, equity, inclusion. We also have to dismantle the inequities that we have already implemented in our society.
What's it called again?
Restorative justice.
And it's not in the bigger glossary either. The updated OFM bigger glossary.
I think we back that.
Yeah.
Raphael, when you're done typing that, do you mind just pulling up the OFM glossary as well? I know you've got it on the computer.
Yep. 1 sec. Okay.
Are you all seeing it?
Yes, it has
Raphael,
2020
No.
at the top.
I can't see it. I
I can't see it either.
think you might need to reshare your screen.
1 moment.
Thank you.
How about now?
Perfect, thank you. If you could just scroll down. So I just wanted to draw everybody's attention up one page. Sorry, Raphael.
Yep.
Again, as I mentioned, they're doing revisions, so I just wanted to make sure to highlight this. And they are showing exactly what types of revisions are being incorporated into the glossary. So you can see that in the new 2022, they have added the terms anti-racism and pro-equity into the glossary table, in addition to adding those definitions. Raphael, if you could just scroll down to the actual.
Can you make it just a slightly bigger, like 100% or 150?
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you.
How's that?
Thank you,
That's
Raphael.
better.
Okay. Sorry, Shannon, scroll down to where?
Just to the terms here.
Okay.
Perfect. If you could keep going. Perfect. So just going back to Alanis's point and Chair Jackson about restorative justice not being incorporated in here, you can see it's not there. So we'll certainly want to do our diligence on coming back to the Commission on Equity with a definition on that.
Or implicit bias, because it's listed there alphabetically and it's not in OFM's glossary at all.
Chair Jackson, it might be under bias. I think they break it down to explicit and implicit, but Raphael's pulling it up right now as we talk.
Okay, let's
Implicit
see.
and unconscious bias.
There you are, right there, Chair Jackson.
Okay,
Perfect. So
okay.
we'll
super.
certainly come back with that.
Great. All right,
Thank you, Raphael.
Like who created this document?
pardon me?
OFM.
So the
Office of Bias.
the Office of the Washington State Office of Financial Management is has their
Seems
own
fun.
diversity, equity, and inclusion organization, and they have worked in conjunction with the rest of the state departments, and they've come up with the glossary of DEI terms.
Okay.
on there. They continue, like Shannon said earlier, they look to continuously update either annually or.
And sorry if we've already touched on this, but what exactly do they use these for? I know that we will be incorporating, these terms into our work. But how does the OFM take these terms and use them effectively in their environment?
So I can tell you from personal experience through, they utilize it to incorporate statewide diversity, equity, and inclusion training
Okay,
for
nice.
all state employees. And they work in conjunction with other state employees, mainly with now it's escaping me, the Department of Enterprise Services, who is in charge of actually training and facilitating DEI training for all state employees for the state of Washington, statewide employees, so not local city government employees. But it's a recognized document throughout the state of Washington, and as such, many organizations, not just the state itself, utilize these glossary terms.
So I was gonna say, I feel like these would be very effective in just school education as well.
Absolutely.
Because these take very just like straightforward scientific or just basic definitions of these terms that don't really have any necessary bias, it's kind of just like, this is what this means, and you can take it the way you
Standard.
want, but this is like just the basic definition, what you need to know on an educational basis, rather than like a bias.
Right, when I think of it in this term, so the Office of Financial Management is also housed the State Human Resources Division for the entire state. And as such, every department within the state, they have their own diversity, equity, and inclusion sections. So they carry their own managers, DEI managers. Some of them will involve social justice, some of them will involve social and equity justice. Every state department has sections that involve strictly within DEI aspects and capabilities. And so they all collaborate together and come together to create documents just as such. And like I stated earlier, like the Department of Enterprise Services, they are tasked, when you become a state employee, they will facilitate the training for you to ensure that you've taken the DEI training to become a state employee as well. That's just to be a state employee.
Right.
It doesn't mean just to work in this particular department.
And so do teachers qualify as state employees? Well, they do, but do they take the same training that you're describing?
They take the same training and similar training in other school districts.
Nice, okay.
And one of the purposes for this glossary is to come up with some uniform definitions so that it doesn't shift from one entity to the other. So the state came up with, after a lot of work, this glossary. So,
That's actually what came to my eye, and what it was being highlighted to me through these definitions was just like the very straightforwardness
Right.
and non-biasness of
So
all
you won't
this.
find a situation where a certain state department will be using different types of terms or creative terms on their part. They're gonna be utilizing the terms that's on this glossary. It's a uniform glossary for all state departments.
Yeah, it seems as though it could be very effective if
just-
used in a positive way.
Just a point of quick clarification. I think the comment had been made about particularly teachers and whether or not they were state employees that all have to take standardized training through the state. I think certainly want to do a little bit more research on that, because my understanding is that they are going to be employees of school districts, and that might have different standard across districts, different districts. So we can follow back up with more information on that one, Commissioner Blackburn. So Raphael, if you don't mind stopping this share, and we will start
And the link.
the PowerPoint, or sorry, the Jamboard session again. Just a few more on the actual items. And the next section we're going to take a look at is specifically looking towards the further breakdown of the goals and strategies. Perfect. And so is there any questions or comments or thoughts from the Commission on Equity on item number 14 specifically?
no, I think if those 5 points are identified under those 4 goals, that would just about take in anything we might want to include there. Maybe once the draft of the report is done, we might discover something, but on the surface, those 5 subheadings should take care of it. And no matter what we might be talking about, it should fall under one of those 4 goals to keep this plan manageable. Hi, Joan.
Hello.
All right.
Any
Then
other
we will-
comments on number 14? Goal, strategies, and accountability.
All right. So then the last are 15 and 16, which are the accountability. So again, kind of organizing all of the indicators and really making a kind of clear presentation of, what a report out would look like on those types of benchmarks and indicators. And then wrapping it up with 16, which would be the appendices, which would be the full information on, things like the OFM glossary, engagement findings, and existing DEI efforts, in addition to the ordinance that created the Commission on Equity. Any questions or comments on this one?
I just have a general question. These departments of the city, and we've been consistently receive reports where they lay out their staff. And some lay out the diversity that's involved, and we found some that lacking. How are they going to take this when there's a benchmark laid, and then over time, there's no improvement, no changes? What kind of friction is going to arise, and how are they going to look at this commission, questioning them improving or not growing or developing their departments from a DEI perspective?
So
Some will
Vice
be
Chair-
doing great and some may not be doing, making any improvements.
Sure,
Are they-
yeah. And Vice Chair Brown, I think that gives a good opportunity of, kind of unpacking, what is potentially, a solution or barriers that need to be looked at, and, further diligence on behalf of the city. One thing I would remind the commission is the commission, as we're putting this together, This is something that is going to be recommended to the full Lacey City Council for consideration. So this would be a policy that was adopted by the council ultimately. So to your point, I think if and when there could be issues like that, that certainly means we need to take a look at, hey, what might be going on? What barriers might we need to do a little bit more research and take a deeper dive into what could be solutions moving forward or opportunities moving forward.
Yeah, because, you know, something, a thought that has crossed my mind more than once is when we had the last department here with,
Finance?
no, facility before that,
Public Works.
Works?
Public Works.
No, for.
And they were really proud of their staff and they showed all the photos. And then we asked a question. You know, I can just imagine what they were thinking when they left here. You see? So.
Well, I think when the council approves our document, then it also shows a commitment to working through. You know, it's good when conflict comes up because then you can work with it. When it's not coming up and it's repressed, then it's hard. But I think the council approving this would come with the commitment to be working forward on these issues.
But to Cliff's point, I think, you know, when we get through the draft of this report, and if there are some factual statements that we need to make as a commission, we make them. You know, we aren't doing the city any help by not making them through the lenses we bring to this effort. And it wouldn't be our intention to create any controversy or chaos, but to do anything less, I think we're not operating out of integrity as a commission. That's my thought about it.
Come up.
We'll see.
Mhm.
Any other comments? Anything else on this one with through appendix number 16 there? Appendices 16. This might really be the bulk number of pages in the report. Quite often appendices can be. Yeah.
Will it,
Very, very true.
Shannon, will this document have a search area where you can type in something and it pulls you to it?
Absolutely. We'll make sure that there are bookmarks. It's extremely accessible
Yeah.
and you can look up search terms. So it's OCR'd.
It's gonna be huge. Good.
All right. Well, Raphael, if you don't mind stopping the Jamboard and pivoting back to the PowerPoint presentation, I'm really making Raphael work as the facilitator of tonight's meeting. So thank you again, Raphael, for doing this.
Of course.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked again kind of broadly about some of the elements that we're going to start drafting and working on, I just want to go back and start talking about indicators. Over the last couple of Commission on Equity meetings, we've talked really in depth on goal areas and impact statements and strategies. And now that we have a general draft of all three of those things, moving forward, we want to start looking at indicators. Now, this is just an example of some of the indicators, and the goal of today is to introduce indicators under draft indicators under workforce and work environments, and to start that conversation and get some information from you all. And Raphael and myself will take that and refine that and then bring forward draft indicators as well for the other areas at a subsequent meeting. So Raphael, if you could move forward on the next slide. So looking specifically kind of a deeper dive at the workforce and work environments. So again, just as we talked about with the context of, in this section, really providing relevant data. And something that I heard just brought up a second ago in conversation was, city employee data. So when we're looking at workforce and work environment, the idea would be that we would have a snapshot of when this plan was adopted, and then as we're talking about accountability moving forward, providing updates at a regular interval, what what that is, whether it's a year, quarterly, et cetera, that's to be determined. But taking a look at, what is the comparison between city employment and the city of Lacey, with racial and ethnic backgrounds at just generally across the organization, across maybe functions or departments, and then also across leadership. A brief, an overview of what, DEI, HR, human resource efforts are ongoing, or police department efforts are ongoing, or other types of workforce programs that might be going on across various departments. So going to key terms, looking specifically at incorporating definitions, again, of like workforce diversity, inclusion, cultural competency, cultural humility. And I know at a previous Commission on Equity meeting a while back, we had a pretty in-depth conversation about cultural competency, cultural humility, or is there some other term that would be better used through the document? And so as you can see with the draft, we continued to use cultural competency in the draft, and certainly, we can have further engagement and dialogue on that. But I just wanted to go over again, the OFM's definition was an ability to interact effectively with people of all cultures and to understand many cultural frameworks, values, and norms. Cultural competence comprises of 4 components: awareness of one's own cultural worldview, attitude towards cultural differences, knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, and cross-cultural skills. And a key component of cultural competence is respectfully engaging others with cultural dimensions and perceptions different from our own, and recognizing that none is superior to another. Cultural competence is a development process that evolves over an extended period of time. And I just really wanted to emphasize that that last statement of cultural competence is a developmental process that evolves over an extended period of time. So Raphael, if you could just go to the next slide. I pulled this really good diagram from the University of Kansas, and it's really talking about the continuum of cultural competency. I think the concern when we first brought up this language was, well, do you ever fully become culturally competent, and can we use that term? And I think this graph does a really good job of showing that it is a broad continuum, and that you want to continue to move along the spectrum with the idea that it is a development process that continually evolves over time. And so we've kept cultural competency in the draft language. So I just wanted to make sure to draw that to everybody's attention, but certainly we can have further conversation about that as we're taking a look at language moving forward. So with that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions or comments.
If we can go back to the slide that has under the cultural competency, the one that's boxed in with green. I think it was just next slide, Raphael.
This one?
Yeah, the one in green, and Shannon, you just made a comment. That last sentence, that cultural competence is a developmental process that evolves over an extended period. It certainly involves over a period of time, and that was the statement you used. Extended period says to me, folk can lollygag forever. I mean, I would prefer to have to say it evolves over a period of time. I mean, could mean the same thing as an extended period, but it did sound quite like forever. The people whose lives are being impacted on a daily basis due to these circumstances, they don't have forever to see change in the workplace and in the environment and in their lives, but that extend over an extended period. That just sounded like forever and a day, and maybe cultural competency never becomes an actuality. Oh, I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm working on it. It's coming. I'm working on it. Give us time. And for the people impacted, they've been asked to give it time for centuries and centuries. So that's my only comment. And I don't know what other language, but I like the language you use, over a period of time. And hopefully take the city of Lacey, what is that? 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? So nobody's around to even see the fruit of the labor over that extended period of time.
I see what they mean in the sense of like, it's not just gonna happen overnight.
I
They're-
understand.
Yeah, like they're just trying to say like, it's a step-to-step process as the next slide shows, and from like, the green or the red
Right.
and the arrows are pointing to the blue, but the extended period of time element can allow people to look at this document and be like, okay, so, we have these, like, for example, with the protest at River Ridge last year, we had short-term demands and long-term demands. That way people couldn't say, okay, we'll get it done and us never see it happen, which ended up happening anyway. But that was the whole point of having short-term demands, was to ensure that this whole extended period issue going on with, equity and fairness was not going to be extended any longer, because that whole extension period that we are giving people tends to just go on for centuries, right? So we kind of just want to dismantle that whole vocabulary of like, oh yeah, it takes time to, not be racist type thing,
I just tossed that out there. I don't know if there's another word, but I liked your language of over a period of time versus an extended period.
Or we could do educational period instead of extended period. It's an educational period of time in your life. Very short educational period.
I really don't have anything to suggest
Right,
as a
yeah.
substitute, but the word, when I first read it, that extended period of time. In this country's been going on for Black folk for over 250 years now. That's an extended period of
Yeah, I was
time.
gonna say.
Uh,
how long is it?
But I know it's not instantaneous, not gonna happen overnight, so it does take a period of time. So I don't know what language best articulates that. So that was the only thing on that caught my attention before we passed that particular page.
So can we say then evolve continuously?
Yeah, I like that.
Because we're constantly,
Yeah,
evolving and changing and,
you're never fully completely,
yeah.
or non-ignorant. There will always be cultural instances that you aren't aware of or yet to learn or discovering, to the day that your time on earth is over. So, yeah, I agree.
That still sounds like forever to me, though. I would definitely want to see an element of, where they go back and take a look at, what's been updated as things change. I don't know how you would incorporate that, but an extended period of time, once that time frame comes up, let's say it's 10 years down the road, then what? Are you going to take a look at things and maybe revise? What happens once we get to that extended period of time, and then what does that look like?
So Commissioner Hart, I think you bring up, a good question of, hey, well, how do we, use the indicators, and what does that look like moving forward? And I certainly think that's, what we want to talk a little bit more about of, we've got this definition moving forward. How do we incorporate that into what we're looking to see? And I think that'll come out in some of our benchmarks and our indicators, and that will certainly warrant plenty of future conversations, as Vice Chair Brown brought up about, hey, what does it look like after a 1-year period, a 2-year period? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to do more research? Do we need to find out what's going on that maybe we didn't contemplate at first? So I think this is a really good conversation, and I think that leads us into taking a look at some of our benchmarks and indicators here.
And I like what Alana said about, the River Ridge thing, doing, okay, here's our, I guess if you think of it like a business, here's our 6-month goal, here's our 1-year goal, or 18-month goal, here's our 3-year goal, here's our 5-year goal. Okay, so if we've got those benchmarks and we've got those goals, then do we stop and do we do a review of those at that point in time, and then say, okay, so we've gotten there. Did we get the outcome that we were going towards? And if not, then where do we need to to fix things? And if we did, then okay, does that help us get to the next benchmark?
I
So
think it-
definitely putting an after action review, once you reach said benchmark. And then, you know, just kind of looking at it, quantifying it and see, okay, did we get good, you know, feedback? Did we get good, not reviews, but like good feedback and good output? Or do we have to go back to the drawing board and revise some things and take a look at our future goals and make those changes?
I think it just across the board, we want an overall expression of a developmental process that consistently evolves and is sure to be evolving over time, rather than just an extended period of praying for cultural awareness.
Yeah, and I think definitely, you know, once we hit those benchmarks, if that's like, okay, now we're heading to the right direction, then people can see that, you know, we're making steps towards, as opposed to, okay, here's an extended period of time and we're not seeing any progress.
Yeah.
Good. Is there a way to add this continuum into our glossary? When we're going to use it, when it becomes one of the terms under one of our categories? Can we add this cultural competency thing?
Absolutely, Commissioner Clay, we can work to get approval to use this or try to identify a similar resource that would be appropriate to incorporate into the document.
Because I think it's a good.
This is one of the better graphics I've seen on the cultural competency and the continuum.
Yeah.
So yeah, however we can incorporate that, it's a visual that I think would serve a big purpose.
Yeah.
Thanks for digging that up wherever you found it.
From Kansas.
Yeah.
All right, so that brings us again, just high level. I've got the draft strategies that were included based on previous conversations. So Raphael, if you want to advance the slide once. So that's just, again, just giving the information of kind of what we've put together. And then now we want to get into draft benchmarks and draft indicators. And so kind of similar to what we've done with the strategies, what I want to do is just provide a very high level overview of them. And then we'll transition back to the Jamboard for a more nuanced conversation about, you know, things that we should take a look into or consider, questions, comments, critiques, ideas, thoughts. So if you all will allow me, I'll just take a couple of minutes to go quickly over some of the things that we have put together as a draft, and then we'll have a dialogue on that. So Raphael, if you want to go to the next slide. Great. So just some distinctions in how we're using benchmarks and indicators. Using benchmarks as a indicator, but it's of something that is expected to be achieved at a point or points in time. So my example is going to be a benchmark might be the adoption of the DEI strategic plan. That is something that happens and then it's adopted and won't be, you know, necessarily reconsidered for a revision or a new adoption for several years. A more kind of nuanced indicator, some people like to call it key performance indicators or indexes. There's a lot of terms that you could use synonymous to that, are systematic comparisons of performance. So things that are measurable throughout time, or you know, values that determine how an organization achieves a certain set of objectives. So for example, I've got the adoption of the DEI strategic plan. One of the goals is to create a more welcoming community. And so a key performance indicator to kind of see if we are, you know, moving in that direction with the adoption of the strategic plan, for example, could be the percent of community members that feel welcome in Lacey. And this could be accomplished, you know, by a community survey or community outreach and engagement in various forms. Any questions just really quickly on those two terms and how they're being used? Okay, great. So we also, to the best degree possible, and it's not always that you're going to be able to get every single one of these SMART goals, is to make the indicators and the benchmarks very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Now, we certainly want to hit most of them, but just something to be thinking about as you're looking at the benchmarks and the indicators. Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they relevant, and are they timely? Next slide. All right, so that takes us, Raphael, if you want to open up the Jamboard, and I'll just go over these really quickly, and then we'll go into a little bit more nuanced dialogue. So I've provided a couple of draft benchmarks, and before we go into comments, I just want to read all of them. So the first one would be, and these are benchmarks again, that specific kind of achievement, to perform organizational-wide equity assessment on a regular basis. So the idea being, 2-3 years to do an assessment, and from that assessment, determine very specific indicators. The second one is to adopt a workforce equity plan and to implement that plan across departments. Raphael, if you could advance it to the next page. We've got comprehensively expand operating procedures for pre-hire and recruitment to include more systematic advertisement of open positions with specific professional and minority servicing organizations and for candidate recommendations. And to continue to evaluate and remove barriers to city employment. Next slide. To establish a baseline equity training program that would be required for all city staff, and to incorporate this into that onboarding for future city staff members. Next one would be to establish a optional advanced equity training for city staff required for city leadership and supervisors. Next slide. Establish a cross-departmental equity team internal to the city, sponsored by the city leadership, that evaluate also the need for other internal support networks throughout the organization, and to create more opportunities for informal dialogue on equity. To integrate the equity language from the OFM glossary into our city policy manual and other city documents, and to engage with professional organizations committed to specializing and advancing workplace equity. And then finally, to create internal leadership and mentorship program that supports workforce development throughout the organization. So those were the draft benchmarks, and then moving into the draft indicators. So again, trying to find very specific data points throughout time that could be used. So the first one being determine those indicators specific to the organization-wide equity assessment. And then we've got % of jobs that incorporate equity as a core competency, % of staff members that take required equity training program increases and eventually reaches 100% of the city staff, % of staff members that take the advanced equity training program increases annually, and % of staff who identify as people of color and different genders increasingly matches community demographics at all department and levels within the organization. % of total job applicants received who identify as people of color and different genders increasingly matches community demographics. And then % of staff who identify as people of color and different genders that remain with the city employment over select intervals. So for example, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years increasingly matches the city demographics. So that was really quickly the draft benchmarks and indicators that we've put together. And I would be very interested in reviewing each of these with the Commission on Equity. So Raphael, if you could take us back to the beginning benchmarks, and we'll just go kind of page by page. And if you have thoughts or ideas, questions or concerns, happy to go through them.
I have some ideas. I observe from a school-wide basis, and even from what Dave Schneider, I believe his name was here explaining, it seemed to me as though a lot of the equity training that we have is kind of just like, oh yeah, I did it. But then he proceeded to tell me that he couldn't really be a representative for people of color as an undiversified person, but really you can be. You know, we have non-people of color in this commission on equity. So it is possible to be an ally and a representative of people of color without being a person of color. But when it seems as though like we're taking these equity assessments and it's kind of just like how I do my homework. It's like, let me get this done so I can survive. You know what I'm saying? It's not really like, let me like dive into this text and really deeply conceive this information so I can better my understanding of chemistry. No, I just want to, get it done. That way I can get my degree, right? And I feel like that's what a lot of these teachers and a lot of these people in these positions are seeing these equity assessments and trainings as. But I will say from just like a personal perspective, it was always being inspired and really having hands-on work or like another human's perspective on a situation that caused me to like really see what was going on. So to have some hands-on training, to have something that's more than a book and a test on the book, even to have the Commission on Equity come in and do these trainings, as people who are, not so ignorant about the situation, some hands-on, some in-depth training that these teachers and lawyers will truly be inspired by, or people who work for the state will truly be inspired by, that they'll leave saying, I don't want to cause any inequity in my work after going to this training, rather than being like, oh, finally I did this training, now I can go into my job,
That's a good point. As leaders in organizations like the city of Lacey, you have to be cognizant, you have to be learning and growing when it comes to DEI. Because if something happens, a major lawsuit or big mistake, what's gonna hit Channel 5 or Channel 7 News? They had no diversity training. Or when we interview people, it was inadequate, those types of things. So as leaders, you have to take that serious, and then you have to, have your employees also understand the importance of it and the seriousness of it. You can skate by until something happens seriously, then everybody's exposed. And as a leader, you don't want that to happen. So you need to take this training seriously, take the development, and become more culturally competent over time. As the representative, as a prosecutor, have people he's consulting with to share with them and help him do things he doesn't understand, like you mentioned, because he has a responsibility to know and be aware and to be fair and to be equitable. How he does it, it's incumbent upon him to really get it and learn it and be about it and live that. And that's something that if he hadn't had an experience with it, you gain that through education and through your work experiences and other things. He could be a white male, he could be married to a Korean. He could have a Korean wife. He can have an African-American wife. He can have a Native American wife, and he's learning over time based on that experience. But it's all comes down to your own, personal life and experience and how you live and where you live and what you're exposed to be a good representative. If you live in a closed community, closed society, you're not going to be effective.
Kind of a side note, I would like to take some of the courses that are mandatory for the staff and just see what they are.
Yeah, in my past experience, when I met with a department head, one of my questions was, so how's your department doing with diversity? And it's amazing. The responses we get. Some of them are doing well and they're happy to share. Others, they're dumbfounded. They hadn't even thought about it, they hadn't looked at it. And then I go on to give them some information and they go, oh my God, I didn't know. I got work to do, you see?
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon, leaders, senior leaders to make sure the subordinate leaders understand and are working on that piece, throughout.
Yeah, like I spent going on 12 years of my life, in history classes, learning about Native American culture, well, white man's version of it. And I don't necessarily, I can't remember, like recite module 1 of, this book, but I can tell you exactly what my friend's dad came in when he came in as a guest speaker and, his Native American uniform, and told us all about his experience. And when I led classes, just kind of going over the basics of Black Lives Matter, I made sure to include the students in my lesson plan. So it was like, okay, can you answer this question? How does this feel? Let's get in a circle and talk about how the groups feel about this, and what we all can do, kind of making it more of like affirmation and like an affinity group, rather than like reading a book and taking the text and like putting a test on it. You know what I'm saying? Something that's really going to get these people in their chairs to be like, okay, like now I really have to dive into this because I'm part of this conversation. Like although I'm not a person of color, my decisions affect people of color. Therefore, this training is for me too. But it's easy to just feel like when, somebody's giving you a lecture or you're watching a video online or reading a book, that it's just something that, you do to get by, but instead we need to include these people who are not diversified, these people who feel like, oh, I can't do anything because I'm not a person of color. No, you actually have a lot more to do as a non-person of color. And so it's important to like make them feel included in these conversations. We had this lawyer sitting here, is like, oh, well, there's really nothing I can do about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, there is so much you can do. You have such a big position of power. And it's a fact, he's been here for what, 22 years, or no, sorry, not 22, but 12. He said he's
Since 2014.
so he said 2008,
6
so that's
years prior.
14 years.
Yeah.
And he feels like he can't do anything for people of color in his position. How much equity training have you really done? Are these trainings really impacting you? And how can we better these trainings? So very important.
So hey, Raphael, do you mind stopping the share here for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because it sounds like we're just having a broader conversation, so I feel like it'd be a lot easier to see everybody as we're having that, rather than the tiny little screen. So I just want to say, going back to the draft benchmarks and the indicators, so these are things that, again, in a draft form, but kind of the what we would use and see. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're in place currently at the organization, but something to continue to move that conversation forward. I think I heard, Commissioner Blackburn, you and Commissioner Vice Chair Brown and Commissioner Clay all mentioned, hey, these trainings. Well, it's also about, hey, how do we standardize this? How do we get meaningful? And that's what I think I really heard. How do we get meaningful things where we can really take into and operationalize in our own lives moving forward in the organization, outside of the organization? So just to give kind of some context for, the Commission on Equity to think about as we're looking at these draft indicators would be really, hey, let's get a standardized approach to these types of training. Commissioner Clay, I think you brought up, I'd like to attend them. Well, again, kind of standardizing them and seeing, what they are and, how do we improve and augment them moving forward so that people, again, do take what they are, learning, whether, I hope it's not just a book, Commissioner Blackburn, I hope it's more engaged than that, and really being able to apply it, again, here at the City of Lacey, but then also as community members at large.
I would say one of the biggest things that you got to keep in mind is a lot of the things that we've talked about in the last 5-10 minutes really, it really comes down to accountability from the top. Okay, and so it's a leadership thing. And so, a document that we're creating right now, such as the DEI strategic plan, well, it's meant for everyone citywide as a whole, but in reality, it starts at the top. Accountability has to be taken from the top down. Okay, because when you see your leaders are accountable for that and they want to implement that, that's when really things happen. We can do so much, as employees of the city or in other places, and we can do everything we can to create the training, to take the training, to create benchmarks, to put these indicators in. But it matters, it has to matter somewhere, and it has to matter with leadership. Okay, and leadership has to take onus and accountability of it. And so when we engage personnel and we ask them questions such as, how diversified is your organization? How inclusive is your organization? How do you take equity into account? Do you know the difference between equity and equality? Right? And it comes down to those factors where leaders generally have to ask those kind of questions and say, actually I do. Let me tell you all about my strategic plan, and let me tell you how we as an organization function from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective versus, other leaders who may not be readily available to answer those type of questions. And so it really comes down to selling it to the top, right? And selling it to the point where they take accountability. And then they say, you know what, this is what needs to be implemented from the top down. It should never be a bottom up kind of thing, right? It shouldn't be employees trying to get the buy-in of the leadership. It should be the other way around.
Yeah.
And that's where some organizations, they could create as many DEI plans and put as many initiatives as they want. But at the end of the day, it'll never succeed if there's no buy-in from the top. And I believe that what Shannon is doing here and what we're doing here, trying to create this plan, that's really where it's geared towards, right? Because at the end of the day, it's gonna have council buy-in. Okay, and it's gonna be citywide implemented, and then that's where it starts. And I feel like the direction that we're going in right now definitely will answer a lot of those questions.
I totally agree with what you said. I mean, I think you really nail it with that. That leadership is so important. I mean, we had an experience recently this summer where a key leader in the community goes, oh my God, I need to learn some things. I need to work on my knowledge on D&I. Yeah, DEI. This person was lacking, and something hit them, at this particular event where this person reached out. This is, can we meet and talk about this? I got some work to do. And that's the kind of eye-opening experiences we need. And now this person is ready, to get in, engage, and learn and grow. So that's the kind of impact we can have with city employees and the leadership and working your way down. So I can just imagine that person's organization, the total lack of diversity because of that person's lack of knowledge and understanding. So.
And that's really the goal too, right? We want to get to the point where it's just an everyday occurrence. It's almost, not almost, it's normalized. It's natural. It doesn't, the first time it comes to light is when an oh snap moment just occurred, right? It shouldn't be at that point. It shouldn't be when a problem is identified. It should be put in place and leaders buy in to prevent problems from being identified in the first place or from coming to light, right?
I notice on 5 and 6, 5 says establish equity training for all, to be required for all staff. And then 6 is the optional advanced training for city staff, but it's required, the advanced training is required for all supervisors and city leadership. Now, I wonder, does city council fit in that second one? City leadership, can we ask city council to do these trainings?
So that's what city leadership is? The city makers?
So yeah, Commissioner Clay, I think you asked a really good question, and maybe what I think you're also saying is some language that really incorporates that too. And so what I would say is, hey, again, we're crafting a recommendation for the city council. And so they will be able to have a conversation off of the recommendation. So if this body wanted to move forward with that language, right, that specifically said city council, they could certainly take a look at that and during their review deliberate on, whether or not to move forward with that.
Yeah, well, I would like to add that. That's
Comma,
my jam board.
including city council members.
Or even city elected officials.
It's still bizarre to me that people have gained these positions of power with their lack of knowledge. And it all just comes down to our education system again. And back to what you were saying about leadership and how until our leadership people in leadership positions take accountability for this ignorance that they've caused, there's not going to be any sort of, repercussion, right? You could have kids out in the freezing cold for 6 hours for 5 days straight, and if the leadership does not comply, it all goes away,
I concur with Annie in her recommendation to clarify city leadership by saying comma, your language and John's language. Elected and, what'd you
Elected
say?
officials, elected city officials. Because that would include city council, the mayor, everybody except the city manager. I don't think, it's not like.
Of the city council.
So our elected city officials would be our full city council, which would include our mayor, our deputy mayor, and all council
Right.
members.
Right,
That's the intention.
great. I had a comment on the indicators. I don't know if you've gotten over to that page yet, Shannon.
I say we just have a broad conversation on it. We can take some notes on it because I know we're kind of jumping around. So happy to move over to indicators, Chair Jackson.
We're kind of out of control today.
15, 16, and 17, I had some concern about some comments. 15, where we were talking about, this is an indicator, percentage of staff members that take the optional equity training, training program increases annually. Is the city allowed to mandate this training, or is it left optional for employees? That's a question. It's not a commentary, but that word optional struck me.
Well, so
Then-
Chair Jackson, I guess just to clarify, the idea would be, hey, yes, there's two kind of, at least as drafted currently, you've got a program that you want your full staff to be taking, and then you also have an additional one that you'd like to increase
But
staff
yes.
members taking over time.
Okay, so optional is appropriate there then, huh?
Yeah, so if you look at
Advanced.
14, Chair Jackson, yeah, that's talking specifically about, hey, like the onboarding and making sure the entire organization eventually, has that full training. And then the 16 would be more advanced training again for city supervisors, leaderships, and as you all have added elected officials as well, city council specific.
Okay, then I have a general question that applies to both 16 and 17, where we talk about the percentage of staff who identify as people of color and of different genders increasingly matches community demographics. And that's kind of repeated in 17. How will we determine what's the different gender percentage in the community as we're trying to match it up with the goals?
That is a fantastic question, Chair Jackson.
I
So I think to your point, as we, bring individuals onto the organization, we have them fill out information. But you are correct. It is information that aligns with the census. So, our American Community Survey or our decennial census, and that does not ask about gender, it asks about sex. So you are correct, that is a data point we'd have to consider about how we get a community data point as well as a city data point.
Yeah, I just looked at that and say, how on earth, what do you imagine here? What's the database how do we know what the different genders are out there in the community? But anyway, you get the point. So that was a concern I had on 16 and 17 there. How do we know?
Yeah.
And I think, applying that to 16, 17, and 18, considering that it's using the same language.
Mhm.
Is there something we can put in a benchmark that indicates that we're going to try to collect that data? I mean,
I think that's so nebulous, we'll never get.
Yeah, that's really hard because say you put on the survey, you put optional for them to answer and or other, and then they can type in, but it's self-reported. So you're not gonna get an accurate number or count because it's self-reported. It's just like if you ask the races, you know, some people look at it and go, that don't apply to me, and they don't put anything in it. They could be multiracial, and all of them, the standard doesn't talk about multiracial, you know, so you don't have a choice. So you're not gonna get accurate data in many cases. So trying to, you know, getting beyond sex is hard to get any additional ones. I mean, the numbers would be so small, I think they just.
Self-reporting.
And it's self-reporting, yeah.
Yeah.
So we can never get that number, then we can't be comparing it to the percentage of city staff to see if,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
so
Well,
those two
yeah.
just
Well, the-
impossible
Yeah,
to do.
nebulous.
If
Federal
we're getting this
government.
information in a survey format, we could possibly make it as a, select multiple rather than just one. So I noticed like in a lot of job applications or even just like, filling in my information, it's like, what are you? And it's like, select one, but I'm like 5. And so I just have to pick black because that's one of the many, but it's like the most obvious, So kind of just, I feel like that would be a great way to kind of avoid that because, some people maybe they identify as multiple genders rather than just one. So if we're going to get this information in a survey format from people, we could give them multiple options of, what they identify as and that other option as well, in case anything that we have listed does not apply to the people taking the survey.
Yeah, well, California has lots of options you can choose from, but it's not the national standard, you know, so they're different, so.
So we can decide if we want to begin to collect that information in a benchmark from our city employees, but we have no power to change the US Census or, or finding a
How do you
broader
drill?
community
Mhm.
benchmark for that, but.
I just think it's a nebulous indicator, as far as trying to compare. How did the city do about having,
Because we don't have a
different
comparison.
genders comparable to different genders in the community? I mean, I just think that's a very difficult indicator to use.
Another way possibly to use that indicator to get more data driven specific to it would be the various events that go on throughout the city of Lacey and the Commission on Equity's involvement within those various events, similar to, think back to the 41st Juneteenth celebration, right? Where we had our tent pitched up and we had community members coming up to the tent and we were speaking to them on various, pointed topics. Well, in the future, one of those topics could be basically outlining some of these benchmarks that we're establishing to get to those indicators. We could ask very poignant questions to the community. And it could be establishing ourselves throughout various events throughout the year. It would take an effort from the Commission on Equity, but I believe it's something that can be done and it can be achievable. Right, so that could be in person as well as also establishing online surveys on the behalf of the commission. And then just engaging with other community leaders through means such as the community connectivity analysis that we're putting together as a city, and we could reach out to various partners throughout the city and continuously look to collect data and input from our various partners. And so while, still a challenge presents itself in those aspects, I feel like we can get more of those indicators coming in to see if we could be hitting more of those benchmarks to see if those indicators can come in.
Yeah, well, I think maybe a follow-on effort next year, year after, maybe we could drill down to that. But for now, I think the benchmarks can be the major categories, and then we drill further, from there. It talks about people who identify, or different genders and those who identify as people of color. Those are key things there. So the gender, people of color benchmarks, then you can compare to what the city is doing in their police.
Yeah, I mean, women in employment is important, and we have comparisons we can use for that. You noticed there were a few women engineers and a few
Right.
women on the Parks Department, but most of the others weren't, you know, I mean, it is something we would like to continue to get the reports on.
Yeah, and I think, Shannon, I'm sure HR will probably have an issue with this, but we can't set specific, say, percentages or numbers on, as benchmarks, say, women, men,
Like a quota.
LGBT, right? We don't have affirmative action. We can't, here, as we set these, I don't think we can say you need to be, you know, have this percentage of people of color. You know, and it needs to be increased. The goal is to increase it by 5% in 12 months. Or we need to have these many women, or these many men, or these many people over age of 40, or people in protected class. I don't think we can't get that specific.
Vice Chair Brown, that is correct, right? But we could say, take a look at, hey, you know, let's take broadly look at our applicant pool, and, you know, what did we do to reach out to, you know, organizations or groups and try to get more applicants in the process, to your point.
Right.
And the point I was making was going beyond male and female when we talk about women and men. That used to be the case, but we're talking about transgender, bisexual. That was the kind of thing I was saying.
Yeah.
How on earth do you get a handle
Yeah.
on that in the community to be making a comparison to the city? Male, female, you know, even that's become complicated.
Yes, that's cultural competency on an ongoing basis. We're developing, but it changes so very much, you know, and then you have the people who are open and proud that they're gay, lesbian, or whatever, and then you have others that are closed about it.
Yeah.
So it's just very difficult. You won't get accurate data. You just cannot.
So chairs, commissioners, I certainly think we need to take a look at this. I think to the point where we don't have accessible data like we do, you know, through our census on some of these markers. So we will certainly do some more diligence on our end and come back with some potential ideas and tweaks to 15, 16, 17, and 18. So more to come on those ones.
Great, thank you.
On 16, we're looking at, we want to know that this staff who identifies as people of color or different genders increasingly match the demographics at all departments and all levels within the organization. And that part it is important to me that not every person of color ends up in the park department, you know, and not every woman ends up in the, you know, cleaning department, but then we have, you know, our numbers look good. So I like that it's in all departments and all levels within the organization. Just a comment.
Yep, that last. Something about development.
This is retention here. 18 is kind of getting a retention with the city.
And 18 is about retention.
Yeah, I thought there was one about yes, development,
Oh, and internships and
into
you know,
things. Yeah, that caught my eye. That is something. we
that was
definitely-
11 under
11, yes.
Under the
Go to that
benchmarks.
one.
Mhm.
Here we go. Right.
So that is create an internal leadership and mentorship program to support workforce development. But Vice Chair Brown, to your point, it does not mention internships.
Right,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's how we, you know, get new staff, young staff, and grow them and develop them
Uh-huh.
to
In
do a
some of the
career with the
areas,
city of
yeah.
Lacey in a variety of areas as they grow and develop, yeah. So, yeah, and internships is definitely a way to introduce someone to an organization,
Yeah.
whether they're a high school student
Bring our
or
summer
a
help
college student.
into Vermont.
Those various programs. So if those don't exist, that would definitely want to be a benchmark that
Mhm.
I would like to see that we develop those.
Yes, and once you do that at the high school or college level, then that's when you start seeing, maybe more diversity into maybe being somebody that wants to be an attorney or a lawyer with the gentleman who was here earlier today, or somebody who wants to be, a part of one of the other areas that might be lacking, that may not be something that they know much about. But if we, curate them and bring them in an internship basis, then it opens their eyes to, okay, maybe I do want to go ahead and go to college and learn what it takes to be able to do something like this.
Absolutely. And, and then the next step would be that the city of Lacey, sponsors them into college, and supports them through their college, experience. So they return to the city, those types of things.
Or possibly just like, every summer, maybe come back, every summer so that they at least learn it and then eventually get hired on.
Yep.
So we'll
Anything
certainly
else
come
on
back
this?
with a draft for internships as well.
And then the indicator for that would be basically included in 18, that we maintain these people that they continue to be with us.
Does the city have a volunteer arm? Is there a place, can volunteers do things for the city? I mean, we're a volunteer commission. Other,
That's a great point, Vice Chair Brown. Yes, we have volunteers at the city, and advisory bodies are one example. But just like I was talking about contractors earlier, there's a variety of outlets for volunteers, and I'll just give a couple of examples. So we have, volunteers who work at our police office as greeters and welcomers and resource agents. And then we have individuals who adopt streets, adopt trails, organizations as well. And then we also have individuals who, a new program that the city just created allows them to, in a kind of non-organized way, pick up litter around the city in certain places. So yes, there's a variety of opportunities to volunteer throughout the organization.
okay, good. Good. I want to be a volunteer police officer, drive that cool,
Golf cart.
yeah, the cart they had there.
The cart.
Put me a nice uniform on. And talk to the
Sign
people.
yourself up.
Any other comments on the indicators? Sounds like we're done with that one.
So Chair Jackson, just one quick comment. So I know this was the first time we had a discussion on it, and I'm sure, over the next couple of days, you might have some additional ideas. So if the commissioners could go onto the Jamboard, which you all have in the email that I sent earlier, and just take some time between now and the 10th of October to provide any additional questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, etc. That would be greatly appreciated. And Raphael and myself will take all of those comments and compile them and come back in front of the commission for our next workshop.
For just what we've talked about today, or benchmarks or?
Correct,
the
specific,
other information?
yeah, specific for workforce and work environment, because Commissioner Clay, we will come back again with the other indicators as well. This was just our first goal area, and we'll return with some more, and you'll have the opportunity to do the same thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Chair Jackson, that is the end of my, my item on the agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Then that takes us to commissioner reports, and I had a couple of items I wanted to mention, and they've already been, a couple of them already been mentioned. We did receive written input from 2 letters from members of the public about the issue of event sponsorship. And more than likely, there's going to wind up being a potential meeting between the Parks Board and the Equity Commission to look at the sponsorship policy that the city has. And that's been one of the indicators in the mayor's response to these letters. So just a heads up that at some point we might be asked to meet jointly with the Parks Board, looking at the city's policy on event sponsorships. I've been a part of several conversations lately where people are interested in possible joint gathering of the various DEI efforts that are underway with the different cities and civic entities, and Lacey being looked at as leader of the pack. We're far further ahead than City of Olympia, City of Tumwater, Thurston County. And it's not just the municipalities that are getting in on DEI and all this stuff. I discovered Olympia Rotary has a DEI commission. Someone else has a social justice something. Look, so it's a whole bunch of folk around here, but nobody's coming together to talk about DEI on a county level basis. So I don't know where those conversations might go, but I do know they're happening. So in the future, I might be coming to you, just informing you of some effort to bring joint voices together. And the other one was the whole issue of the school thing that I brought up. And our student commissioner brought it up as well. Where are we in the community as far as the progress along the lines of the issues the students brought forth to the administration? And I don't know what level of conversation might be able to happen there. Just so the next time stuff flares up, we know what's going on. And so I just raised the question, might there be an opportunity? Is it something we initiate or wait to be invited to a conversation or what? But where is the school district on their response to what went down last spring in this community? So those were the 3 points under my commission reports that I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention. Any other commissioner with any other comments or things going on outside of our meetings that involve any of us in any way?
I just wanted to bring up the Cultural Center one more time and just talk about our possible collaborations with them and just just overall working together on some cool stuff. And I already see them repping your book in there very heavily, which I'm very happy about because it's such a knowledgeable piece. So.
Tell us a little bit more about the Cultural Center. Is it affiliated with the school district? Is it
no.
on the school?
No, it's actually in Tumwater of Little Rock Road across the street from the Walmart and the Costco.
Oh,
and
yeah,
Walmart and all
yeah.
that. It's in the it's in that little strip mall with the pizza
The old
place and-
Pellegrini Event Center.
Yeah.
That's the space they're in.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's enough space to have a lot of for example, if we were to facilitate this meeting with all the DE&I throughout Thurston County, I'm sure the Cultural Center would be more than happy to provide us with their space. You know what I'm saying? Like stuff like that. We could really utilize them for, as well as them utilizing us. Let's say they, want us to lead a group of students in a class on equity, stuff like that. We could really use each other to work together and make some good stuff happen.
Good. So do you have sponsors? How's it funded? How do you?
I know Krishna is either the owner or part owner, and I have all of their contact information. So if we are interested in doing some sort of collaboration work with them, I'd be more than honored to just let them know and just see where that goes from there.
In terms of the meeting with DEIs, you're getting a lot of information about who at the colleges, who you have,
Yes.
that's part of your equity
Yes.
thing. And do you have ideas about bringing people together?
I would say, probably it could be along the same lines of what others have been saying. It's just a matter of really getting all the names and understanding who the people are,
Mhm.
you know, that are out there, right? The organizations, and then it's really coming up to the commission at that point saying, hey, so this is what I have, right? And again, I'll emphasize that, that if you all know of others that are out there that you would like to see added to the analysis, please, you are able to add them. I can resend the link to you all where you can just click on that link and pop in that information as much as you know. You don't have to provide everything. Just if you give me a name or an organization or even a location and say, Raphael, can you find out more about this? I will do my research at that point to give you everything I can in terms of who they are. But the point would be collecting all that information collectively as a whole, so that if you all want to engage in some sort of group session or collaboration or bring people together, whether it be just schools or just organizations, then we can facilitate those kinds of things, you know, whether it could be here or at another installation or somewhere else for that matter. But I will do my due diligence, and once again, I'll make sure to push out the analysis link for you all. If you know, I have this person in mind, let me just drop that in there and let Raphael do the rest of the research. I will most definitely do that research for you.
Yeah, I think we should keep that in our mind, that sooner than later, we should do that, get together.
Then, Shannon, how about your director report?
Well, Chair Jackson, I'm actually gonna ask if you wouldn't mind speaking on the upcoming Mosaic and Goose Pond Historic Marker dedication before I move on to mine.
Well, this is an interesting event. There was this artist by the name of Jennifer Coombs who developed a proposal to get one of these art grants to do some new artwork in relation to Black Lives Matter that my husband and I had no knowledge of whatsoever. And to her surprise, her proposal was accepted by this foundation. And she wanted to do something different, and Black Lives Matter was really active at the time. And she did some research on us, and for some reason I haven't yet to understand, she settled on us that she wanted to focus on. And then we were informed that I've written you into this proposal. Was that okay to do, kind of thing? But it evolved, and she's done a fantastic job of just taking a photograph and using thousands of pieces of colored glass. It's come up with this mosaic of this portrait of us, and it hung in this art gallery for 6 weeks over in Eastern Washington. And then she brought it back over here, and she's making it a permanent gift to the city of Lacey. And so that's what's being unveiled and dedicated on October 4th, and it's going to be hanging in here in the community center, not here, the city hall, the community center for a while, and possibly later on in the new Lacey Museum once it becomes a reality in years to come. And from a separate kind of thing, the walking path that goes behind our property is now a part of the city. And so that's where the marker is going, as a piece of land that came from the Jackson family as part of the park and trail system. And so the mosaic being unveiled and dedicated at the community center, and then following that, the marker being dedicated along the trail. So that's October 4th, 4:30 to 6:30, and you're all invited. And Shannon, thank you so much for including that in the, I was surprised when I saw that in the agenda when I printed it off today. So that's what it's all about.
Really?
Mosaic and Goose Pond Historic Marker dedication. So thank you. We're very honored to, first, for the artists who have chosen us and then for the city to have taken the interest in it that they did. So we appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's well earned.
Pretty fun.
My family, yes. Thank you, Shannon.
You're welcome. Chair Jackson, I do not have a report under director's report.
Okay, great. Well, if there's nothing else to come before the commission this evening, then we stand adjourned. Thank you all for being here. We had a full commission contingency tonight. Thank you. Bye-bye. We'll see you all October 24th, Monday, October 24th.
Oh, boy.
Have a good evening.
Who wants to do inspiration?
Thank you, Commissioner Clay. I totally missed
I was waiting
it.
on that one.
This is what happens when you when I remoted. So I appreciate it. Keeping me on my toes.
Who would like to take responsibility for that?
Yeah.
For October. Hey, our youth commissioner, Elena's, wonderful. Thank you, Elena's. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone have a good evening and let's enjoy the last little sunshine of summer before fall officially hits us and go from there.
All right.
Good
All
night,
right.
everybody.